Coming to you from the Forge of Freedom studio in the heart of America. A podcast dedicated to preserving freedom and inspiring personal success. Freedom is born and lives through you, the individual, and it dies in the shadows of tyranny. Motivating our listeners to become well-rounded, freedom-minded people with the body of an athlete, the mind of a stoic, and the spirit of a warrior. The tree of liberty lives on through you, the Forge of Freedom. And now here's your host, Alex Uli.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uli, and this is episode 77 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, I've got attorney and firearms instructor Mike Uli back in the studio. Mike, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Alex, good to be here.
Today, for Monday Gun Day, we're going to be talking about books that we recommend regarding firearms and self-defense. But before we get into that, Mike, I think there was a few things you wanted to mention, just sort of news-related items that you wanted to touch on before we get into our book recommendations.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit, kind of, I'm sort of a serial watcher, I think, of YouTube, and sometimes I get fooled by these breaking news stories all the time, but and I avoid the which aren't breaking at all. They're
you
just
take the bait.
Yeah, I take the bait and watch the stuff when there's really not much breaking going on. But I thought it was important maybe to talk a little bit about the news, a news item. I think it was this week, maybe last. And it's really not so much about the news, but it's about preparedness and kind of being ready and firearms and that sort of thing. And it goes back to the Nashville school murderer. I think it was Covenant Presbyterian School.
Covenant. Yeah.
In Nashville that happened, I believe, was earlier this year, March. Does that sound right? The exact dates aren't terribly important for the point that I want to make anyway. And that is that I think this last week or so, what's his name? Stephen Crowder, released what was purportedly a portion of the manifesto of the school murderer down there. And I'm not going to repeat her name. But she purportedly had some manifesto, and for reasons that she sounds like, if you believe that this is part of her manifesto, and I do.
I haven't seen anything to the contrary.
Yeah.
It looked like the officials down there were scrambling to figure out who had leaked it.
Yeah.
But there was no effort or information I have seen to suggest that it wasn't legitimate.
Well, I haven't listened to a lot of Steve Crowder's commentary on this, except what he did and his crew did to verify that this was legitimate. So take it for what it's worth. I mean, I personally have an opinion that it's legitimate, a portion of it. And once again, this is only a portion. Number two, I think the telltale sign that it's probably legitimate is there are like 7 Nashville police officers that were put on, I'm not sure what the technical status is, like put on, not probation.
Some sort of leave.
Sort of leave or something. So that tells me that the Nashville Police Department, probably more likely the mayor's office, validated that this is in fact authentic, in my mind. And by the way, I'll mention when we go into this, the Nashville police, I think, did as well as police can do with respect to their reaction to this mass murder that occurred at this school in Nashville. So kudos to them for the reaction that they made and what they did. And now it's a shame that some of them may have administrative action taken against them. Maybe, who knows what's going to happen as a result of trying to get the truth out. And I'll leave it to your viewers or listeners to think about why the government didn't want us to see this manifesto. And I'm not going to talk about that's another story. But here's what I want to talk about just a little bit. In the manifesto, I've got one page in front of me, and it's a little bit difficult to read, but I thought I would mention a couple of things here. And keep in mind, I mean, I praise the police for their reaction here, and I should know this, but their reaction time was pretty fast, but it's still several minutes before they were able to react and get to the school.
It still supports the proposition that you are your own first responder, because even when police act in one of the best ways possible, these are exemplar police officers that responded to this incident, they still can't be there in seconds, or they can only be there in minutes when seconds count.
Yeah, even Superman can't get there quick enough. So anyway, I want to read a little bit about this, and then I'll kind of come in a circle and tell you my point about this. So this is this mass murderer, and she says, and I'm reading not the whole thing, just parts of this, but she says, I'm a little nervous, but excited too. Been excited for the past couple of weeks. There are several times I could have been caught, especially in the summer of 2021. None of that matters now. I'm almost an hour and 7 minutes away. Can't believe I'm doing this, but I'm ready. I hope my victims aren't. That's one of my points. And she was counting on the fact that the victims there would not be ready for the attack that she was about to perpetrate.
And in fact, when she arrived, one of the first things she did, according to her manifesto, was to check for security. She wanted to make sure that there were no security around.
Yeah, and she had purportedly, if you believe the press, had staked or had talked about another mass murder somewhere else that, and I don't know where that was at or anything about that. But my suspicion is she may have avoided that one for reasons that
she was seeking a softer target.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
But she said, I can't believe that I'm doing this, but I'm ready. I hope my victims aren't. Mm-hmm. And then she goes on and says, my only fear is if anything goes wrong, I'll do my best, blah, blah, blah. And then she talks about God let my wrath take over my anxiety. And she says, it might be 10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Basically, she's saying, right, that she
tops, 10 minutes tops. It might be 3 to 7. It's going to be quick. I hope I have a high death count. And then she goes on. So here's my point. Like you said, you're going to be the first responder. And we don't expect kids to do that. We don't expect kids to do this, but I want to make this point. In Indiana, and Alex, I think we did jointly, maybe you did, back earlier this year. This is just Indiana. We passed a statute. You can go back and he's got it up here for us. Episode 21. And it's about a statute that was passed in Indiana that provides funding for schools and school boards to arm teachers. Okay. Those teachers would be right there. You don't have to wait for the Nashville police to show up or whatever police department. But this was passed. It provides funding and it provides standards.
Training standards.
All that school boards and administrators have to do is make the decision that they're going to protect kids from evil murderers like this one who know that they're going to have, what did she say? It might be 10 minutes. It might be 3 to 7. Who know they're only going to have a few minutes before, guess what? Somebody with a gun shows up and stops them. This person was not well trained. Usually it's over when somebody with a gun shows up. And I guess what I want to say is if you're a school board member or you're an administrator, or even if you're a parent in one of these government schools, and from listening to podcasts, we're not necessarily big government school fans. But I think you're derelict in your duty if you don't thoroughly examine the statute, and you better have really, really good reasons in my mind for not availing yourself if you're in Indiana of this statute. Because I think if it ever happens, you need to look in a mirror because you're going to be the one responsible for what happens in that 3 to 7 to 10 minutes.
And I'll link to the episode 21, where we talked about this statute here in Indiana that provides, like you said, Mike, funding and training standards for schools that want to allow their teachers to be armed. And the training is very thorough training. It's training that would equip the teacher beyond what a police officer receives at the Indiana Law Enforcement Academy before they go out on regular patrol.
Yeah. So these teachers are going to be better trained than probably the average.
They will
patrol.
be.
Well,
they will be for the task that they are expected to complete, or for school security for that particular task.
If you compare government training, the only reason I hedge on that a little bit is it's possible that officers go out and get training on their own. Mm-hmm. But you're right. In all likelihood, that's going to be the case. They're going to be better trained, better equipped to handle mass murderers like this one that showed up in Nashville.
But let me back up. I'm comparing to an officer that comes right out of the academy.
I understand.
Yeah. So not officers in general, but officers that only go through their training at the academy will be less well equipped than a teacher that goes through the mandated training in Indiana if the school board avails themselves of this statute.
Yeah, and we don't mean equipped in terms of just the hardware, the firearms. We mean equipped in terms of their training and ability to react to one of these mass murder situations. So, I think it's, if you care about kids and you're on a school board and you're an administrator in Indiana, maybe you've already done it. Kudos to you. But you better come up, in my mind, with some really, really, really good, valid reasons not to do this.
And guess what? There are none. There are none.
There are none.
But John Lott, we've talked about him quite a bit from crimeresearch.org or Crime Prevention Research Center. There has never been a school shooting at a school that allows their teachers to be armed.
Yeah. And here's another thing I'm going to tell you. So many school administrators and local sheriffs, they're really into getting school resource officers. That's great. Get a school resource officer. I'm not aware. Maybe one has stopped a murder somewhere. I'm not sure. I always think about what's the one Parkland down in Florida, where the school resource officer that I'm thinking about was not effective at all. But anyway, I don't know what the statistic is, but whatever it costs to put, and I don't care, people talk about grant money. It's not free. Grant money's not free, folks. It has to come from somewhere.
They're taxpayer dollars.
Yeah.
And it's not the government's money.
Yeah, it's not the government. It's your money. But whatever it costs to put in a school resource officer, whatever that number is, and I shouldn't be better educated. I knew it one time. Whatever that is, you can train like 30 or 40 teachers for the price of that one school resource officer.
To this high standard.
To this high standard, which is probably going to be to a higher standard than the school resource officer that's into the school. Now, I don't mean that as a diss on those school resource officers. So as school board members, if you're listening, if one of you is listening, you're committing malpractice, in my opinion, if you don't look into this and do something about it.
And there's a lot more to say about this topic for sure. And we went into it in a bit more depth in episode 21. So I'll certainly link to that in the show notes and encourage our listeners to go back and check that out if they haven't already, and share it, because frankly, not only do we want schools in Indiana to avail themselves of this statute, but we want other states to pass statutes like it, or at least for schools to understand the sorts of concepts that are important to protecting their school, because armed teachers are by far the most effective way to protect the children.
Yeah, and I want to make just one more point about this. Even if you implement such a program, you can keep the teacher anonymous or teachers anonymous. You may only have one teacher, but the fact of the matter is these murderers, like the one that showed up down in Nashville, they don't know if half the teachers are trained and armed. If they all are, if one is, they'll go somewhere else.
Yeah.
They don't want any resistance. These people are cowards for the most part.
Yeah.
So anyway, and also from an individual standpoint, it means, think about it. You're still your first responder. You need to have a firearm. You need to be trained with that firearm. Not that, and we're not advocating government standards for training. We're advocating real, earnest, legitimate training to be able to use that firearm. You need to have some skills in first aid, and you need to be able to use those before first responders get there in that 7 to 10 minutes, wherever you're at, and maybe longer.
Well, and Mike, I think that's a good sort of prelude or segue into the topic for today, where we're going to talk about books that we recommend for folks who want more information, quality information on the right to keep and bear arms, on self-defense, on mindset and preparedness, all those sorts of things. You've got quite a stack here, and you can't see the whole stack on the screen here, but he's got a stack of 10, 15 books here.
Well, you're telling everybody I have to have the books because of my advanced age. I can't remember the books.
I've got my own separate stack here as well. So we've got quite a reading list here for you. But the reason we're covering this topic today is, Christmas is coming up. And if you or someone is interested in this sort of topic, and we wanted you to have easy access to a book list with great resources. So I guess, Mike, just to start out, where do you want to start? We've got quite a few options here. Which one do you want to mention first? And some of these we've talked about before, but we'll mention them again.
Yeah, and I thought I'd just talk about maybe a little bit, mention a couple history books, maybe more than anything, and sort of the gun control, Second Amendment stuff that I think's both good reading, both books that are good reading that we've mentioned before. And we're going to sound like Stephen Holbrook groupies or something like that. I don't know. But one of the books that he puts out, The Founders of the Second Amendment, Origins of the Right to Bear Arms. That's a good book if you want just it's backwards there. Will people see it?
Oh,
it's
right. Mirrored correctly. Yeah.
Showing technical novice here.
Yeah.
But anyway, Stephen Holbrook's book there. Also, Gun Control in the Third Reich, another great book. And I'm not trying to say that everybody's a Nazi that we're, in the political left in this country, but it tells you, it describes what happened in pre-Hitler Germany and how a lot of those laws, some good intention, some not so good intention, were used when the government did turn sour and did turn evil in that country. So those are both great books to read. If you've not too many people have them, the government will probably try to outlaw them. But if you've got a wood stove or a fireplace somewhere, it's a good thing. Maybe you can get in front of that this winter and read those.
Yeah. One thing I want to mention before we move on from Stephen Holbrook, obviously I had him on the podcast a few episodes ago regarding his book, America's Rifle, The Case for the AR-15. That's also more of a history book, also kind of a philosophy book. And we actually discussed that a little bit in the book, not just the where does the right to keep and bear arms come from, but why, and the philosophy behind it, the philosophy of self-ownership. So he's actually got advanced degrees in philosophy and history. So he's really interesting, and he's an attorney.
An attorney that's argued before the U.S. Supreme Court.
So he's a very interesting and compelling writer for those reasons. But if you read The Founders' Second Amendment, Origins of the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, that book is very relevant to what's going on in the courts these days. Obviously, with the Bruin decision from June of 2022, the courts have shifted their attention to the history of the Second Amendment and the history of the regulation of the Second Amendment, or the individual right to keep and bear arms. And I think if you read his book, you'll have an excellent foundation to understand the sorts of arguments that are going on in the courts.
I listened to, what was the case, Rahimi, last week.
Tuesday.
I wish that perhaps some of the justices had read Stephen Holbrook's book about the history. But anyway,
right.
I digress a little bit. But his other book, the AR-15, what's it called?
America's Rifle, The Case for the AR-15. And I'll link to that in the show notes.
That'll become relevant if you want to understand what will probably end up at the Supreme Court. And that's one of these, quote, assault weapons, end quote, ban cases from Illinois or somewhere else, maybe the one that the atrocious decision that just came out of the Seventh Circuit. So that's a good book to read as well to understand some of the context.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll do my best, by the way, to link to the Amazon link for all these books in the show notes as well. So if you want a reference for these, you can look at the show notes for this episode. The next one's, Mike, looks like you've got...
I'm going to talk about these first.
Okay.
Now we're going to shift. I'm shift. You want to talk about one? I don't want to hold.
No, I'll see I'll see what you cover, and then I'll fill in with a few at the end.
All right. So I'll kind of shift to kind of the history of the Second Amendment and what's going on in the legal system right now, to basically preparedness and making sure that that you're trained and you know what you're doing. We said get a firearm, don't dwell over that. Get a nice good Smith & Wesson, a good Glock of 19, or a Smith & Wesson M&P, or a Smith & Wesson Shield, or something like that, and learn how to use it. Okay, how do you learn how to use it? You seek training. One of the things you can do is also read, but you actually need to go out there and train as well with the competent trainers. But one of the books that I think is a great book, the NRA, if you don't know, and we've got problems with the NRA now with its current leadership and what's going on. There was some good news to report that you had. With respect to one of the elections that are coming up for the NRA, but that's
right. There were four. Well, Jeff Knox was on the show several episodes ago. I think it was episode 64. I don't remember off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
I'll try to link to that as well if I can. But he was running as a reform candidate along with three other candidates that were publicly outspoken about the problems with the current NRA board, the current NRA leadership, and are hoping to reform the NRA because even though the NRA is sort of in the dumps right now, I think that a strong NRA going forward is important, and so do these reform candidates. Well, they had to collect enough signatures to get on the ballot for the election. So earlier this week, or last week rather, we learned that they did, each of the four reform candidates did get enough signatures to get on the ballot. So I've never heard of 4 petition candidates making it onto the ballot. So that was fantastic news, especially since they are people who care about a strong, functioning NRA that acts in the interests of its members.
Yep. So one of the things that I want to mention then is the NRA brought that to my mind, is they have, there's lots of NRA trainers out there that train on just a wide array of subjects, but the NRA has been in the training business since right after the end of the Civil War, believe it or not. And they've have a long and very good history in terms of training publications and training books. So one of the books that I think is an absolutely great book, and this is an old version, it's spiral bound, which is what I like better. The new one's bound with glue or whatever. But the NRA Basics of Pistol Shooting is a great, great book. Now, you're not going to be able to get this book, I don't think, maybe you can buy it off Amazon, but it'll be absorbent price. You're going to have to take the NRA Basics of Pistol course to get this book, in all likelihood, because I don't think you can buy it directly from the NRA, but it is worth the cost of an NRA Basic Pistol training course just by itself. And this is more about safety and the mechanics of a pistol and the different types of pistols out there, whether it be revolvers or semi-automatic. But it's a great foundation. A lot of people, I think of an NRA guide and they think, oh, it's going to be too basic. It is basic, but I guarantee you, I don't care how long you've been around guns or how much training you've had, you're probably going to read that and learn something no matter what your level is. And if you're truly a beginner, it's a great, great, great place to start.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. What you got next there?
Another book, if folks have listened to you can see all my notes and stickies and stuff, but it's Tiger McKee's The Book of Two Guns. You know that if you've listened to these other episodes that we did a lot of training with Tiger, thought an enormous amount of him, respected him enormously for lots of reasons. But he was a disciple of, I think, Clint Smith and Gunsight. So his book is a great book, and it's The Book of Two Guns because it's about the 1911 pistol and the AR-15, 2 subjects that he was incredibly competent on and a great trainer with. And this book is sort of unique in that it's his notes to a great extent. It's just his notes and his handwriting that talks about the different things you should know with respect to a 1911. And by the way, most of the things regarding a 1911 that he puts in here are applicable to even modern polymer pistols as well. And there's also a lot of training information here with respect to the AR-15. I'm only sad to report that we can't train with Tiger anymore.
Yeah, he unfortunately passed away several months ago, and it's an incredible loss to the firearms training community and to freedom overall. So certainly hate to miss him, but glad he left a great legacy of people who he has trained and literature. He wrote a lot for online publications and then also his book. So
yeah, and I still get and nothing against the other writers on the Tactical Wire, I think it is, but they used to have Tiger on there every other week, I think it was, and his articles. And I always look forward to his articles. I wish I'd kept every one of them. They're still putting them out there sometimes. I know Dave Spalding's on there as well, another a good read and a great trainer. But Tiger McKee is sorely missed, that's for sure.
Maybe I've said before, maybe I'll commit to it here on in public. That I think it'd be a good idea to put together sort of a compilation of his work online. I think that David Yamani did that for Dr. William April, who we've talked about before after he passed, just an easy way to access a lot of his work. So hopefully I can find some time to put that together on our website sometime soon.
I think that would be a great, great thing to do because he was very unique and, like I said, he'll be missed, and it would be nice if somebody could put it together somewhere.
Yeah.
One of the things I'll go ahead and mention in terms of somebody's legacy and how they trained and what their teaching was and how it lived on is Colonel Jeff Cooper, who's sort of the founder of the modern technique of the pistol, the modern pistol technique. I'm not sure which way those words go, but he founded Gunsight. He's passed as well, former military guy. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. Founder of Gunsight. It's still ongoing, Gunsight is. But one of his, what I'm kind of talking about here is foundational books. I talked about the NRA Basic of Pistol Shooting, Tiger McKee's book. I think another kind of basic book, it's not very small, but it's called The Principles of Personal Defense by Jeff Cooper. It's sort of general, but it just talks about what he thinks are the most important principles with respect to self-defense, personal responsibility, which leads us to freedom. And he just basically talks about several principles: alertness, decisiveness, aggressiveness, speed, coolness, ruthlessness, and surprise. So it's a good read. It's a good book. And, it's simple, but when I read it, I was just reading a little passage a while ago. They're so true, though. Sometimes we miss the forest for the trees. And this is one of those books that makes sure you get the forest before you start looking at the trees.
I was talking to a dog trainer in the last episode, and we talked about how so often people have a tendency to jump ahead to formal commands when they're training their dog, and they forget the basics. They forget the fundamentals. And that is so true in the firearms world as well. People forget the fundamentals. They want to jump to clearing rooms and shooting from the car and shooting from awkward position. You got to get the fundamentals down first. And these are great resources to start out with, to get those down, to master the fundamentals.
Yeah, I'll pick on the YouTube thing again.
Yeah.
What do you see on there? Somebody laying down on the ground with their AR shooting under a car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm not saying people shouldn't do that, but it's about the principles first.
Yeah.
It's about the basics. There really are no advanced skills, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing Tiger taught us.
It's mastery of the fundamentals.
That's what advancement means.
Yeah.
Is mastery of the fundamentals.
So, Mike, we've talked about history with Stephen Hallbrook a little bit. We've talked about sort of the fundamentals of marksmanship and gun handling and the principles of self-defense. It looks like you've got a few other categories of books here. It looks like we've got maybe mindset here and then more legal genre. I think those are two decent categories. You want to talk about maybe mindset first, and then
are these the first one? I think is mindset, but it's about we always talk about awareness and avoidance are keys, more important than a training thing that most of us spends enough time for. What I'm trying to say is we don't devote enough time to those areas of awareness and avoidance. One of the books that I think is a good thing, once again, a foundational book to start with, is Gavin de Becker. It's a pretty old book. This is not the latest version, but it's Gavin de Becker's book, Gift of Fear. This is really not a firearms book. As a matter of fact, I would suggest to you Gavin Becker is not necessarily a pro-firearms person necessarily.
Yeah, he's really not.
To the extent that we are anyway.
Right.
He may... Well, whatever. I mean, it's just I'm not going to comment on his politics.
He favors far more government regulation than we do.
Yeah, probably thinks it's better for the government or government agents to have firearms than we do. But anyway, solely for them to have them. But anyway, it's still a good book. And basically what it's about is, and it's geared more towards women, but it's about trusting our intuition. Our intuition is developed as human beings over millions of years to help us survive. Okay? And that's sort of a change mechanism in our psyche or our mental awareness. And basically what it says is he recounts a lot of stories, a lot of them about women. Some of them turn out well, some of them don't turn out well. But it's about all the clues that we gather subconsciously from our environment that gives us this feeling of danger or not danger. And sometimes we ignore that. We've got this notion or this inclination to have normalization bias, and that is to think everything's normal and there's nothing. We try to convince ourselves that things are normal. But what we ought to be doing maybe is listening more to that fundamental intuition we have that's been developed over eons that helps us avoid being eaten by other animals.
Yeah.
Is what it amounts to.
Right. Yeah, and these are instincts, like you said, that have been developed and refined as a survival mechanism. And obviously the Darwinian sort of theory of evolution, the people with the best instinct are the ones that have survived, right? So those are the sort of instincts that we should pay more attention to.
Yep, and not ignore them in the modern world. Another one book I'll just not real briefly. It's called Left to Bang. It's a little more it's later in time than Gavin de Becker's book, I think, but it to a great extent it's based upon the war on terror and what happened in the Middle East, and how soldiers and Marines and sailors too were able to use clues and their environment and context to understand danger.
Right. Well, it's interesting, right? Because in the Middle East, they couldn't necessarily tell an enemy from an ordinary civilian, right? So they had to understand what sort of context clues they had, what environmental clues they had to survive and to identify a bad person, identify the enemy.
But I find this area of awareness and clues. One of the books I didn't bring up is, I can't remember the guy's name. He wrote the book. He was the head of the FBI nonverbal communications area and trained FBI agents. It's called What Everybody is Saying. And what he means by body is your human body. It's a book. I can't remember his name. I'm sorry. I'll get it for you and you can put it in the links. But it is a really, really good book to help you understand how you can read people. And it's not looking at people, like they do on TV. Oh, is he lying or not lying? It's not about that sort of thing.
Joe
Navarro. It's a great book. I think I loaned it to somebody and I didn't get it back. Maybe I'm not sure where it's at in my life, but it's a good book. I would suggest that you read that one too. If you're a lawyer, it's sort of an interesting book as well, to be able to read body language.
Yeah. Somebody who's on the witness stand, for instance. Right.
But it's a very good book, and I would commend that book to you. Once again, in the area of awareness and avoidance, because we want to avoid. The next thing we want to talk about is if you are aware, and despite your awareness skills, and despite the fact that you've done everything you can to try to avoid a violent situation, you need to understand from a training standpoint what may happen to you in that violent encounter.
Mentally and physically. Because the more we know about whatever is going to happen to us, the better we are able to deal with that situation in the moment. Okay. And that may be a first aid situation. It may be a violent encounter. It may be any other emergency that you can think of. But that's one of the things that we have to be prepared to understand what's going to happen to us psychologically and physically. And one of the best books for that is by Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman. It's called On Combat. I'm not sure this is the current cover or whatever. The information is going to be the same, but he was he was a former Army Ranger. I think he was a lieutenant colonel and a psychology professor at West Point. I think he's still. Where was the NRA last year? Where did we go? He was speaking there still, I think. Well, he speaks every year. He was every year at the NRA annual meeting. He gives I think it's a 3-hour lecture, and I think he gives it 3 or 4 times, at least twice. I think 3 times throughout the convention. So it's a wonderful seminar. If you can go, you should certainly attend.
But this one talks about basically, it's called On Combat, and obviously a lot of the scenarios that he talks about and a lot of the psychological reactions and physiological reactions that people have to combat are the same sort of reactions that you're going to have if you're involved in some kind of violent encounter on the street or in your home or anywhere else. So I can't emphasize enough. I know how much time we have here, but I can't emphasize enough how much I believe, based upon taking his seminars, reading his books, listening to other people, talking to other people, and experiences I've had, that it's just so true that if you can be in this situation and say, I knew this could happen and I know what to do, versus this is surreal. How many times do you hear on the news, it was surreal? No, we want you to have the mindset so that you can say, I knew this could happen and I know what to do. That's what training is all about. And by understanding what can happen to you in those violent encounters, those high stress encounters, it'll help you deal with those things.
Yeah. And it's not a book, but if you take training with Massad Ayoob, and we're going to talk about Massad Ayoob here shortly, he talks about Alexis Artwall. Yeah. And she has a publication that basically goes through the sorts of physiological reactions that you might have during a violent encounter, a life or death situation. And that could be a violent encounter with somebody who's attacking you. That might be a car accident. They're the same sorts of reactions that you may face in each situation. But like you said, Mike, if you can anticipate those sorts of physiological responses ahead of time, you're more likely to be able to cope with them.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about Dr. Artwald and it's Massad's book, Straight Talk on Armed Defense, but I'm going to talk about her and William April as well, who's deceased, unfortunately. So, but anyway, the other book that Dave Grossman wrote, along with Lauren Christensen and Michael Askin, is called Warrior Mindset. And it's sort of a parallel book to On Combat, but those two books, I think, are, in my mind, they're required reading to get you in the right frame of mind to understand what might happen to you in that violent encounter. Mm-hmm. And be that person that says, I knew this could happen. I know what to do. All right. So how much time do we have?
No, we have time. We're about 34 minutes in, so we can go a little bit longer here. But we've talked about history and firearms handling and marksmanship and mindset and awareness and avoidance. Next is kind of, I think we're going to talk about Massad Ayoob next, right? Is that, I see he's the next stack. And he's got kind of a broad range. It's a little mix of everything really, except history. There's not much history here, but some history. So anyway, let's get into some of his books. What are a few of Massad Ayoob's books that you would recommend?
We're getting into a little bit of the legal genre, and I guess the first thing that I want to mention is not his first book, but and it's not actually, he did more of the editing, I think, than the writing, because there were contributions by a number of authors. And if you're just starting out on your training mission or your training journey, or even if you're not, this is a great book, because there are authors. This is called Straight Talk on Armed Defense. Okay. And their contributing authors are 6. It looks like there are 12. William April, who's great. We've talked about him before. We've trained with him before he passed, with
Greg Ellifritz.
Greg Ellifritz up in Ohio. Alexis Artwald, Massad Ayoob, Spencer Blue, Ron Borsch, Craig Douglas. This is a who's who of trainers. Jim Fleming, Tom Givens, Marty Hayes, John Hearn, Chief Harvey Hedden, and Dr. Anthony Simone, Semone. So this is a great book, and it covers all these authors have their own specialties in the area of self-defense or armed response. And this is a great book to get you just a wide variety of experience on all kinds of things that you ought to be thinking about if you're going to take the responsibility of being your own first responder.
Okay. Excellent.
Enough said about that. I don't think we want to go into each chapter, but I can tell you, I really enjoyed the book.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we could, I think, in a separate episode, maybe break down some of the chapters in the book, but for now, I think we'll leave it at that.
But this is one of those books, I think, along with Jeff Cooper's Principles of Personal Defense, is a good idea to go back and read again every few years. Yeah. So the next.
Yeah, it's one of those books that kind of gets to a lot of the fundamentals, right? It's one of those
fundamentals, and it's timeless.
Yeah, exactly.
So, the next book, speaking of timeless, I think, and no offense to his other books, but Massad's books, and by the way, Massad's still training. He teaches a plethora of courses. Kind of the heart of his courses is what's called Mag 40, which is 40 hours of training. And that's where you can get a lot of these same principles, and you ought to do that training, but you also ought to read this book. This is a little dated, but so is the Constitution. It's probably the best document we have. But this is still a great book. It's filled with principles and kind of the basics of self-defense, the legal portion of it. When you're justified to use deadly force in defense of yourself or another.
You want to hold it up just a little bit there? Yeah, there you go.
In defense of yourself or another innocent person. So that's what I think is a great first read, particularly when you want to get into the legal aspects of when you're going to be justified under the law and using self-defense.
Excellent.
One of his later books, kind of an update of that is, and then once again, these colors are not right, and this book face is not right. I think it's a different art design, but it's called Deadly Force: Understanding Your Right to Self-Defense, and it integrates some newer cases and things like that, like the Zimmerman case that was down in Florida. It's been a long time ago, but integrates some newer facts, but the principles are all essentially the same.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And I looked up the book here. The book cover did change, but I'll link to the updated book.
Yeah, mine's not up to date.
The second edition.
Yeah, there's probably some additional information in the second edition that I'm not aware of.
Yeah.
But anyway, I would definitely read that for sure.
Yeah.
Another, if you want me to keep going?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that I think is a good read, I apologize because it's not the right edition, but Andrew Branca is an attorney and an expert in self-defense, national expert. He has podcasts and all kinds of stuff out there. You can find him. But this is a great book, and I think you can get this from him for like, I don't know, $3 or $4. I think sometimes he runs a special. Maybe it's all the time. You just pay for shipping and he sends you the book. But it's a great book. And once again, it breaks down an area of the law that can be incredibly complicated and can seem to be very different from state to state. It can be different from state to state. It is different from state to state, but maybe not as different as you think. And you can learn standards, which is one thing we do in our 5.5 hour class that we teach. We try to teach a standard just like Massad Ayoob does. And Andrew does it in this book as well, a standard that you can use basically all over the country. And I think his book is a great read. I don't know what edition he's on now. I know the second edition is not the most up to date, though.
He's got the Law of Self-Defense. He's got a podcast. He's got where he releases regular content on YouTube and I think on Rumble and also by podcast. But he's also got this membership program. I'm not familiar with his membership program, but he also teaches the law of self-defense in a state-specific way. So you can take the online class. That I think might be beneficial and of interest to quite a few people. So certainly read his book, but if you're interested in his online classes, I think those can be really valuable for folks as well.
Okay. Or they could take our class whenever we do it again, which I don't know.
For Indiana, but we don't teach it as many states as he does.
Although we do teach, I think, a principle that's generally is going to be applicable to wherever you're at.
Yep.
One other book that's sort of a little different, and once again, gosh darn, you can tell how old I am because everybody I refer to is dead, it seems like. Or not everybody, but some. Jim Fleming, he's got a book called Aftermath: Lessons in Self-Defense. What to expect when the shooting stops. And I think it's a good book because it gives a different perspective sometimes. Actually, he has a little different perspective than what Massad Ayoob does about, for instance, what do you do when the police show up, the initial responders? Do you talk to them? Do you not talk to them? Do you stay absolutely silent? Those sorts of things. And I won't get into that here today. But he gives a different perspective as a trial attorney about what you might expect if you are forced or required to use deadly force in defense of your life or the defense of another innocent person. So I think it's a good read. And just particularly if you're not a lawyer, it gives you a kind of what to expect in a criminal matter. And here's the other thing. It also gives you a good background so you can kind of sort out about if you hear about a case in the media, it kind of helps you sort out whether the media is reporting things correctly or not, or it kind of helps you be a better consumer of legal news as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we've gotten through your stack there, Mike, but I know that's not an exhaustive list by any stretch, right? I mean, there are lots of excellent books related to the Second Amendment and to the right to keep and bear arms, but also to mindset, to marksmanship, gun handling, and basically anything related to the right to keep and bear arms.
Yep.
But I think this is a great place to start for folks. Just to get through these materials would take most folks quite a while, but I think these are a great place to start. I've got a separate stack over here. I'm not going to go through all of them. Some of them are the same. One I'll mention, this author was also on the podcast, Jacob Hornberger, The Tyranny of Gun Control, I think is a fantastic history book and philosophy book as well, along the lines of Stephen Holbrook. He's also an attorney, an economist, historian. Great book. You can see it's not very big, but I think this gets to the fundamental issue much more quickly than many books, and I think is an excellent resource. So The Tyranny of Gun Control by Jacob Hornberger. Again, he was on the podcast not too long ago. I'll link to that as well. I think it was episode 60. Yep, it was episode 60. The other one I want to mention, More Guns, Less Crime, and this is by John Lott. He's got more recent books out, Gun Control Myths, and what's the other one? let's see here, I've got it. The War on Guns. Both also very good books, but sort of his seminal work was More Guns, Less Crime, I think is an excellent book about just sort of dispelling this notion that if we have more guns, there's going to be more gun crime and a more dangerous world. And I think that that's counterintuitive to lots of folks, that that's actually not the case, that it really is true that an armed society is a polite society, and that where people can go armed for their own defense, criminals are more hesitant to commit crime.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's one of those guys that speaks at the NRA conference, which is going to be in Dallas next year. And he also has an email newsletter that he sends out that's good to subscribe to as well.
Yeah, his social media is good too. If you don't like the email newsletter, I know a lot of people don't like. My inbox is full. I get his newsletter, but a lot of people don't. He's also active on Facebook and Twitter, so definitely check out Crime Research.
I like his newsletter because if you've got a particular interest in something that's in the news over the last month or two, he's probably addressed it.
His newsletter is excellent, no doubt about it. So check it out if you're interested in the newsletter. Along the same lines, there's this book I actually got at Gun Rights Policy Conference from the Second Amendment Foundation. It's called The 7 Myths of Gun Control by Richard Poe. And this is an excellent book, again, sort of dispelling a lot of the notions that you hear from the media about, oh, this is a uniquely American thing when they're talking about these mass killings, or that, look what happened in Australia, they don't have this sort of thing. It's not true. And those sorts of myths are dispelled in this book by Richard Poe.
I'm taking the ones I haven't read.
Oh, okay.
I want to see if Doris will read them to me.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right. Well, we will. I'll do my best to link to all these in the show notes, most of them anyway. And of course, I would also want to. I'm going to let you chime in here in just a second, Mike. Encourage people to read the monthly newsletter from Rangemaster. Of course, that's not a book, but the newsletter from Rangemaster is fantastic. The weekend knowledge dump from Greg Ellifritz is amazing. He links to a lot of great resources. And then the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, their monthly newsletter is also fantastic.
It's very, very good. That's one thing I was going to mention was ACLDN's newsletter that comes out every month. They make it free to everybody, whether you're a member or not, I think, right? Anybody can read it. So it's free, and it's worth a whole lot more than free. I can tell you that. Yeah. The other thing is, now you don't get this unless you're a member, but our friends at ACLDN, if you become a member of Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, and we won't go into what that's about, you should check it out. We're members. Actually, ours are complimentary because we're affiliate attorneys, but we were paying members before we became affiliate attorneys. I made that decision. But it used to be DVDs. I'm not sure how they transfer the videos now, but when you become a member, there are a series of DVDs that are very, 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 very good. And I think that if you get nothing else out of that membership, those DVDs are worth the price of admission by far, if they're still DVDs, however they get them to you. Yeah. But those things are great as well. And then one last thing I'll mention, one of the things that I have gained, I think, enormous knowledge from is Gun Talk by Tom Gresham. It's a weekly radio show. I think it's 3 hours as radio goes. It's 3 hours on radio. It's really not 3 hours because you have commercials, but there are three, whatever they come out to, 40-minute, 45-minute segments, and they are very good. They talk about current topics. Now, I've got to admit, there are some advertising on there. Somebody, ABC Gun Company, gets on there and talks about their latest gun. Okay, whatever. If you're interested in that, that's fine. But there's a lot of good information on there that I know I wouldn't know about if I hadn't spent the time to listen to him. Well,
that's how we found out about Tiger McKee.
There you go. That's exactly right. Gun Talk. So I would highly recommend Tom Gresham's Gun Talk. If you can't listen to it on the radio, which some people won't because it's not carried locally, you can get the podcast. Just listen to whatever, Apple something.
And guess what? How do we find out about ACLDN and Massad Ayoob? Tiger McKee.
Yep, Tiger McKee.
Gun Talk, Tiger McKee. It's a funnel.
Yeah, exactly.
And obviously, Gun Talk is the beginning of that funnel for lots of people, and it was for us to at least a certain degree.
Yeah. So in Tom Gresham, it's just, I mean, there's hardly anything I would disagree with him about. So maybe sometimes he's a little bit more critical of Firearms Policy Coalition, I think, than I like. But anyway,
You like their vulgarity more than he
I
does.
like Firearms Policy Coalition a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, so check that out.
One other thing, Greg Ellifritz, I mentioned his weekly knowledge dump, or his weekend knowledge dump. He's got a great website, Active Response Training. And on his website, he has a recommended reading list where he lists some of the same books that we've listed here, some that he doesn't have some of them, but he lists quite a few that we didn't. And it's a pretty extensive list. I'll link to his list as well. I know that he has, this is not every book he's read by any stretch. He would only include books here that he knows are top-notch quality content. So I'll link to his website for that as well.
Yeah, and he's one of those guys that if he says it, it's well researched, well reasoned, and it's hard to. I don't know of anything that I would challenge him on as far as what I read, but his stuff is Active Response Training website. His website is an awesome place for information.
All right. Well, I hope our listeners were learned a little bit from some of our suggestions here today. Maybe got some inspiration for some books to look into or to purchase as gifts for Christmas, which is, of course, just around the corner. It's already November 12th. The last thing I want to mention before we close up the show is that Lawrence Reed was on the show some time ago. I think it was episode 40. I've got it here in front of me. Episode 40, Lawrence Reed was on the show to talk about his book, Are We Good Enough for Liberty? And this is not a gun-related episode. It was a more broadly freedom-related episode. But we're recording this on Sunday, so yesterday would have been Saturday, November the 11th. He was awarded the Grand Cross of the Order of Merit by the country of Poland, which is the highest honor bestowed upon a foreigner by Poland. And that was for his work that he did in Poland during the 80s and after the fall of the Soviet Union as well. But he was actually incarcerated in Poland for his work with the underground liberation movement there. And it was, like I said, he was awarded this award yesterday, November the 11th. By the time this is released, it would have been 2 days ago, but I will link to the announcement about that as well. But there's a paragraph in his speech that I just wanted to read here in closing, and I think it's important. Let's see if I can find it here.
You know you're going to read this, and I'm going to have a comment. So
yeah, exactly. I had this pulled up here, and I lost my spot. All right.
While you're looking for it, can I say something?
Sure.
About that? We had the opportunity to go to Poland this summer, and I really, really enjoyed. I'd never been to Poland before, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I remember going to Eastern Bloc countries. Doris and I were in the military and in the Army, and we were in Europe when the wall came down. And we got to travel to some Eastern Bloc countries after that, not Poland. I remember Czechoslovakia very distinctly going there after the wall came down. And I remember Poland this summer. And it's always interesting that folks that have not, where their countries or their families have not had the opportunity to enjoy the freedom that we take for granted and is slowly and insipidly slipping away in this country. It's amazing how much they appreciate it because they can remember when they didn't have it and when there was tyranny. So anyway, I just thought it reminds me of that, traveling to those countries and how much they appreciated just the freedom.
So I found the spot here. This is his acceptance speech, and I wanted to share it because it fits into the sort of the broader purpose of this podcast. And obviously, the Forge of Freedom. We believe that freedom is easily lost, just like you've been talking about. That it sort of wilts away little by little unless people stand up to protect it. And he says, in a sense, I must share this honor with the millions of brave Polish men and women I admire, whose courage inspired me during my first visit to this great country 37 years ago this month. The history of the late 1980s shows conclusively that Polish courage played a major, indispensable role in the liberation of Eastern Europe. I saw it firsthand during my time here in November 1986. The vast underground resistance to communist rule led directly to the historic free elections of June 1989, the first big crack in the edifice of what President Reagan aptly dubbed the evil empire. What I saw in 1986 was not new for Poland. Your country's history is a tapestry of courage. You endured and resisted foreign-imposed socialism for decades. Before that, you made the Nazis pay dearly for every inch of Poland. Before that, you stopped Lenin's drive to subjugate Europe. And for 123 years, when there was no Poland, Poles showed the world how a repressed and occupied people stand up to tyrants until freedom and independence are won. And so I just wanted to share that with you, partly as an honor to Lawrence Reed. I think that it's a well-deserved honor for his efforts there. But what he says here, I think, is important, that they showed, the Poles did, the world how repressed and occupied people stand up to tyrants until freedom and independence are won. And obviously, we're not in that situation here yet, but it's happening little by little, and we have to stand up more than they're putting us down, or else we're going to end up in a situation where we are repressed and occupied people. And freedom, it's not passed on through the bloodstream. That used to be part of my intro to this show. It's something that has to be preserved and fought for generation to generation. So don't rest on the laurels of United States freedom, because it's becoming less and less each day. So with that said, thanks for listening to the episode. I hope you learned something. We'll link to all these books in the episode, along with this article about Lawrence Reed and his the honor he received in Poland. So thanks again for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. And until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter at Forge of Freedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.